Hello and welcome to the Mail Privacy Protection, I guess we're calling this a webinar, hosted by Trendline. Times they are a-changing, that's the theme of this. Thank you, Alex Williams, for the theme and the deck design. Today we'll be talking about Apple's mail privacy protection update that's going to be, or a general update that's going to be impacting privacy across the industry, but specifically how it pertains to people send a lot of messaging, specifically email, and what we need to consider moving forward. Before we do that, we do a quick commercial with the commercial slide, Mr. Williams. There we go. We are Trendline, built from email marketing. Trendline is an agency and consulting that inspires meaningful engagement through cross-channel communications. But what does that really mean? Well, we've been in business for, well, now it's our 11th year. We celebrated our 10th anniversary last August. We're about 250 people, composed of all different facets of getting messaging out the door, composed of strategists, creatives, technologists, campaign managers, analysts, and everything in between. We have 6 offices across the United States and Canada. We have sent many campaigns, many messages, and we were recognized in the Inc. 5000 as one of America's fastest growing private companies. So a lot of great stuff there. And we're going to be talking a little bit about our discussion today with this slide. We'll be talking about mail privacy protection breakdown. That's going to be a lot of the Alex Williams show. Hello, Corey. And we'll be talking about specific topics or how this is really going to be impacting 3 things in particular: deliverability, segmentation and testing, and reporting. I have a couple of bios here, and I'm going to take a couple of the lines from the bios. We have Alex Williams. So he was our 4th hire, I believe, at Trendline, Mr. Williams, right? Hire number 4. He essentially built out the full service email practice. He's widely recognized as an email strategy and creative expert, and he didn't pay me $20 to say that. Alex brings a passion and creative problem solving skills to Trendline's clients. That's true. I've seen it seen the man work in action. It's impressive. Alex, he's had his hands in just about everything from every account that we've worked on. He's a frequent keynote speaker, topics related to design, technology, and their intersection in the inbox. So thank you, Alex, for joining and putting a lot of this data together. We also have Mr. Zack Aab. Zack is currently either under the sea or wishing he were under the sea. It's the latter for this particular example. Before learning how to send emails, Zack worked in computer repair, blacksmithing, video production, and knot tying, but not all at once. Zack has his CIPP US privacy certification, his scuba certification, and is definitely not a lizard person. He likes normal human things like email, data, privacy, and sleeping on sunny rocks. And I am Scott. I'm your moderator for today. On to the next slide, please. We're going to hand it off to Mr. Williams to kind of give us a breakdown of what's going on before we get into we're going to call it a fireside chat section of the presentation. So, Mr. Williams, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Scott. No intro for yourself. You didn't want to go 3rd person there?
I like golf.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to start today with just breaking down what we know from what we've seen. So I downloaded the first iOS beta, probably 5 minutes after it came out, and was very very surprised to see this initial screen here. And so I wanted to just walk through what we know about this. I think with all of the trades and all the discussion there, I think there's some areas that are maybe getting misunderstood. So we really want to walk through what we understand this to be, and then start talking about some of the areas that are really affected by this. We'll start out with email marketing is not dead. I don't think this fundamentally changes what this channel is supposed to do and the value it brings to organizations and subscribers alike. But it is an earthquake, as I like to call it, a digital earthquake, combined with other trends in the industry. Privacy is not going away, and it was it was only a matter of time where email was going to come under that microscope. I remember a couple of years ago, I kept thinking, like, why aren't we getting looped into all this? We have a lot of individual data on individual people. I think mainly, email is so much looked at in the aggregate as far as these statistics go, but the individuals, are factored into a lot of strategies and tactics, even though if we're not looking at, Zack at blacksmith.com opened this message at this time, it is still used, and we need to, start thinking about how we're going to move past that rate. So let's get in. So what is mail privacy protection? So crucially here, after users update to iOS 15, iPad OS 15, or Mac OS Monterey, they'll be presented with this option first time they open the app. Now, there was a lot of initial discussion about are users opted into this. So this is enabled. So it is enabled by default. So there's no way around this screen once you update. So however you refer to opt in or opt out, I think that's a core consideration is that this is enabled. So users are going to see this screen the first time they open the Mail app. And I think you can see by the language, it's kind of that, you see the click shaming type of thing of like, no, I don't want to be rich. No, thanks. I don't want to lose 50 pounds, all those type of activities you'll see in modal windows and what have you. I don't expect anyone to say, don't protect mail activity. So the language and the copy is crucial here. And we've also seen from the app tracking prompts that you've all seen now, ask app not to track or allow. Apple's very precise with the language on these things. And I think from some of the last data I looked at that 96% of users in some data sets had asked apps not to track. I've looked at that data by country. Interestingly, France is the country that allows it the most. I'll have to share that data after. I just saw that recently. But yeah, so we're expecting close to 100% adoption. Probably the only people who are going to say don't protect mail activity are marketers. Now, a key thing here, and this is where some of the information, Apple's not blocking. They're not blocking tracking pixels. And then this isn't specifically about your, if you look at what your iPhone open rate is or your Apple Mail on desktop rate or those kind of things, you're looking at open rates. What this is doing is any email address that's delivered, and that's the key word. So anyone who has an email address set up in an Apple Mail app on an updated device will register to open. So I ran this, just as an example here, I ran this single test to a few of my different devices. So you'll see here most popular email clients. Undetectable, 25%. That was the initial open after I sent that out. So I hadn't looked at anything. That open rate registered immediately. And you can see the email client is undetectable. This was in Campaign Monitor, which I love to do little tiny tests with. Then I looked at it on a device running iOS 14. That showed up in Apple Mail as an iPhone open. Then I looked at it at Gmail on an iPhone, looked at it Gmail on the desktop. So there you have 4 opens to 1 address. The first one registered pretty close to almost after I sent it. I think I've seen this in less than a minute, less than 30 seconds sometimes that open will register. So that's the key thing. So as you think about your audience, it's not necessarily what your iPhone open rate is from email to email or the collection of those devices. It's how many of your users are collecting emails. So I think you're going to see a common scenario where someone has their email address set up on iPad. They mainly use their iPhone. Say they use Gmail on their iPhone, but they have Apple Mail on their iPad. If they look at that, that's 2 opens. One is going to be that auto open undetectable. And then a key piece, and when you look through generally what Apple's going for, the key thing is that IP address. But like you saw in that stat, and so I use an example here of email on Acid, which allows you, Litmus has a similar service, which allows you to drop a tracking script in the bottom of an email, and you can start to collect this type of data. What device was it? How long did they spend reading it? What did they print it? Did they forward it? So Apple's going to automatically download and open those images right when they get it, basically. And then the key thing is that they're not going to pass back any of that information that we're used to. So this type of reporting won't really work. This is kind of dead with Apple devices going forward that are on this updated operating system. And then all the images will be downloaded when they hit the servers. And from what we can tell, and I want to preface all of this with we're in the second beta. The third one's probably coming out sometime this month. But so everything we know is just how this is working now. I'm really following off Apple's intent in their language and how they've presented this. So I don't expect much to change. Some nuance will probably change in how this works, but so from what we can tell, they're not requested again. So those type of cache busters, I've heard some people trying some different things out there. I think generally you can assume that once this email is delivered, that's the last time images will be requested. So I use this as an example of a Samsung email. And you can see here on the countdown timer there on the bottom that it's 8:37 and there's 21 minutes left in the offer. Okay. At that same time on 8:37 on iOS 15, there's 6 hours, 3 minutes, and 29 seconds left. So great illustration of those type of tactics that will fetch that image at the time of open. Anything like that, what we would call real time is kind of broken here, unless there's I don't really see any workaround potential. I know some people are crafty there, but I think for things where you're looking to grab the image at the time they open it, all of those tactics are going to be dead on arrival for iOS 15 and up. Now, interestingly, so this, and we'll talk about this in the reporting side, they do provide some things back, right? They have to have some kind of IP address. They have to have a general user agent. So from what we can tell, this is one variable that hasn't been changing, which is the user agent being Mozilla 5.0. Now, usually this is just common on the web, but it's very uncommon in email. So this may be a consistent way to identify those Apple device opens, since it's so minuscule as a user agent. And then also right now, the IP bank isn't exponential. I think from some folks I've talked to, they've seen anywhere from 100 to 200 of these IPs, and they're in a rotation. So it might get to the point if Apple doesn't go down that path, then you might be able to combine a couple of those components and identify the opens. Now, one thing, from this, and you start to think about the vendors from the ESPs, right? So, breaking down these type of opens and, digging into that type of data, we'll see if any of the providers try to, actual open, generated open, if they get into building that kind of thing into the product. But we're talking about digging in the weeds here. And we're in beta 2. This might be subject to change. So just want to throw that out there, though, that there's potential there. Another misnomer we've seen is that this does not affect other email apps on Apple devices, and it won't affect iOS 14 and back. It's just updated OS, just the native app. So when we think about that, right, if you have Gmail on an iOS 15, nothing's gonna change there. I did just digging through some of the data. I also saw with iCloud Plus services that they're gonna allow people to set up custom domains on iCloud and share the custom domain address with the family. I think that's kind of interesting. But so generally just think about this as Apple Mail, iOS 15, iPadOS 15, macOS Monterey. And then, as far as the sirens ringing and the alarm bells going on, I've done a bunch of research on this, and generally the new updates roll out mid-September. I think iOS 14 came out on September 11th. You should estimate that, at least for iPad and iPhone, that 25% of the audience is going to be updated, within weeks, if not a week. And then based on the last iOS 14, over 50% was running by, a little bit over a month later. Now this, and there's a lot of cool new features in this iOS 15, and they're really pushing it. So you should really expect that, as we start to get to Halloween and going forward, that your open rates are going to be very polluted with all of this auto open. Also, what's interesting is, also on the Mac OS, those rollouts tend to take more time. So right now, in some of the data sets that I looked at, I think almost 70% are still running Catalina, which is one operating system ago. And there's not even really great data on how fast the Big Sur adoption. I know, like at our company, we have wait periods on new operating systems from a security standpoint and just a productivity standpoint. So I would expect the Apple Mail desktop universe to be much more gradual and slow. But the iPhone and the iPad will probably get updated, and so I show this data over here. As of June 3rd, 90% of all devices introduced in the last 4 years are running iOS 14, 8%, 13, 2% earlier. So, this is coming, and it's going to come pretty fast. And then won't spend a ton of time on this. I just want to highlight a few other things going on with this new iOS 15, this iCloud Plus. So Apple, with all their tracking efforts, that motivation is to hide your IP address from advertisers, from marketers, from this. So this is the genesis of where this comes from, because if you look at the things that are unique about you that don't tend to change are what? They are your device ID and they're your IP address. So in iCloud Plus, and anyone who pays for any type of storage gets this service. It's like, even if you pay 99 cents, you get these functions, you get these features. So one thing is hide my email, which has been there. Log in, sign in with Apple, creating that. I think currently it's like at privaterelay.appleid.com. They've evolved that service and made it a lot more prominent in the user experience. So anywhere where there's a form field that says email, they will have this autofill option to do this hide my email. And it's actually pretty intelligent. It remembers the website or the app. You don't have to remember this address. I don't know how popular this is going to be, but this is a lot more prominent in the user experience. I know I've looked at some data sets where 40 million subscribers, and it's only 20,000 of the current private relay address, but they will have this option. And then one aspect that does seem similar is it always seems to have a 0 in it, in this generated address, and then either a underscore or a period. So there is a kind of way to identify these potentially. I don't know if people are going to do the, you see that a lot of times on B2B where they won't accept a Gmail address and they'll only accept a work email. I don't know if people are going to try to target these addresses and not accept them. Wouldn't put anything past them, but that's a real wait and see to see how popular that is. I do think that once you've got this in people's head about email and privacy, that potentially, now that they think about it a little bit differently, that potentially becomes more prominent, but we'll see. Another aspect of this is that, say someone signs up for your newsletter with one of these particular addresses, they can just go into the settings and deactivate the forward. I like to call this the silent unsubscribe. Email marketers have probably done this to themselves by making that aspect of unsubscribing a little too tricky. So if somebody deactivates the address, you just get this rejection code, which is 550.5.11. User does not exist. So that'll be something to monitor. I don't have a big prediction on how popular that's going to get. I think it's going to be interesting to see. The other aspect is hiding your IP address on the web. So private relay. It's not a VPN, but it is VPN-ish. And you're not going to be able to watch, you know, French Netflix and that kind of VPN type of thing where you're totally bifurcating where you're coming from. But one thing that has evolved a little bit just from beta 1 to beta 2 is this location piece. So initially it was approximate location or general location. In the second beta, it was general location or country and time zone. So from a personalization, you know, email to web, some of those components, you can see here, like on a weather forecast, when I was looking, it said I was in Seattle and I'm in Portland, 3 hours away. So that'll be another area to monitor. That has some broader implications. And then one more thing I just want to hit on is this other new feature. So what I can tell, and initially in the first beta, this was kind of random and I wasn't able to really pinpoint why this was firing. Sometimes no images would load in the email at all, and then sometimes the entire email loads, but you get this prompt and you hit load content, and when it doesn't all show up, all of a sudden everything appears, and when it did show up, everything was there, nothing happened. But from what I can tell, it is mixed source assets. So if you've got HTTP sourced images in there and they aren't able to be upgraded, sometimes there's the ability to have an HTTPS image, but it's just hard coded as HTTP. So if you have that mixed content, we've seen this in the browser here now for about a year, you're going to get this scary prompt of unable to load remote content privately. So one housekeeping thing there, just make sure you have a HTTPS email program. There's no going back to HTTP. So that kind of covers what we know so far. I see a question there from Natalie. If I'm using a Gmail app on my iPhone with iOS 15, the open will still be tabulated? Yes. This only affects Apple Mail, the app. So good question there. That's a common one. So Scott, kick us off.
I have another question for you, Mr. Williams. So thank you for getting this started. So around deliverability, and I'm going to probably throw this to Mr. Aab as well. If you've ever been blocked by Spamhaus, and I have, it was the worst 36 hours of my professional career, not life, let's be real. Side note on this tangent, I thought I had the record for getting back into Spamhaus's good graces until I met Chris Arundale, whose record is 6 minutes. So props to Mr. Arundale. Anyway, so if you've been blocked by Spamhaus, you probably heard them recommend that problematic senders should, among other things, only send to subscribers who have a last open or click date within the past 6 months. The open rate's a large part of that audience, right? What are the new recommendations for keeping a pristine list now that open rate is let's just say muddy, no longer in play? Choose your mixed metaphor here. And what does segmentation look like in a world where open rate is thrown into chaos? That one I'm going to go a little hyperbolic, but Zach, over to you, sir.
All right, thank you.
You are a Spamhaus and you're telling me how to get, you're a Spamhaus, you're telling me how to get back into the good graces.
Well, I don't know how much I can speak for Spamhaus. I suspect that they're probably not going to change their language for a little while unless they really find that they need to. So open rates have kind of always been a fuzzy metric for deliverability. They've always been sort of a way to predict user interest. So it's important to be aware that open rates have always been sort of inflated and deflated by spam filters. A spam filter may preemptively load an email, which gives a false open. A spam filter may block images, and if the user doesn't say, I do want to download images, then you have a false not open. So open rates have been sort of misused as this really accurate way of targeting segments in deliverability, when in fact they haven't actually been that accurate ever from the beginning. Which means that if, say, your open rate segments now have, say, 50% are showing as definitely opened, which is 50% is coming from an Apple Mail app, then ignoring that 50% and sending to your other openers, your non-mail app openers, is more inaccurate, but not that much more inaccurate than it used to be. So essentially, we're dealing with the sort of illusion that opens are a hard metric when they never have been. So I think that using opens as sort of the base gauge of interest has not been killed. It's still there. It's just going to be much more evident that this is just a starting place. So user interest is going to have to be gauged from other things. So in deliverability and in email in general, usually you're aiming towards a conversion of some sort, which means that knowing what a converting user looks like suddenly becomes more important than knowing if the user has opened the email or not. So while opens are good for sending good signals to the ISPs, they're not actually the point of sending the email. You might have an email where all the information is in the subject line. You don't actually care if they open it or not because they're going to go to the website and do whatever it is that you wanted them to do. Which means that things like personas, narrowing user interest on opt-in, data science in between opt-in and landing page activity, data science between opt-in and conversion are suddenly much more important. And this kind of, as a secondary effect, is going to really reduce the sort of shotgun method of email marketing, where you send to everybody who might possibly be interested and trim people off as they show that they're not interested. That's going to become much less effective because opens are now much less accurate, even though they never have been particularly accurate to begin with, which means you're going to have to go the other way around. You're going to have to start with user interest on opt-in. So I hope that maybe answered something related to your question.
It did, sir. It did. I'm going to throw over to Alex, but I'm also going to answer a little bit of my own question here. Spotify, I was in the app. I'm a big Spotify fan, and the app has been on Spotify for 11 years, regularly engaged with them via email, or 10 years. I don't know how long. But generally, I've been active. And I got an alert in my app saying, hey, is your current email address still the one that you've used and always used? Please click here to confirm that. Alex, that seems like first-party data collection via all, they're reaching for every first-party data source they can to get a sign of life on that address. Is that a tactic that, I'm kind of leading this question a little bit, is that a tactic that you think is going to be employed much more moving forward? Is the name of the game first-party data sources and however you can reset that last activity on the email address is fair game? How do you see this panning out?
Well, it's interesting that, I was talking to a publisher client of ours, and they have haven't opened in 60 days suppression list. And, if you think about that, that's pretty aggressive. So that aspect, I think, Zack, you're talking about of using opens to sort of keep generally what a healthy list is, I think is going to be really tricky. I think the question in the audience here too of what's the estimated percentage of users on the native app? I personally think when this rolls out and the update starts to happen, I think this number is going to be quite shocking to some folks, because it's not necessarily how many people are opening, it's delivered to. So how many people in your audience have their email address set up in an Apple Mail client? I think that number is going to be a lot larger than we think it is. They don't even have to regularly use it, right? It
could be an iPad I set up 4 years ago for my kids, and it happens to have my address tied to it, even though I use all Android devices everywhere else, right? I'll still register as an open if it's tied to it and on Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah, totally. And the good thing about the open rate is it happens frequently, right? And that's why you can use it effectively is because there's a good chance it's going to happen, within a certain time frame. Clicks have always been the standard, right? Clicking and converting is, downstream actions of what you're trying to get people to do. It just happens less frequently. So I've seen a lot of conversations about, well, if we don't know who's opening, let's just send them more email. And we know from a deliverability standpoint that is a trap potentially to fall into. I do think you're gonna, so kind of go to your Spotify thing. I think, so if it starts to be, if we can't get an honest open, how do we get clicks? So I think you're probably going to start to see a lot of, I don't know if innovation is the right word there, but a lot of attempts to get someone to click, right? Let's correct your information. It's a good practice to update your password. You know, sweepstakes, promotions, get a free sticker. I mean, there's all kinds of ways, you know, you can have a good reason to get a click, hopefully, that has some user intent with it. But I do think you're going to start to see that more often. I mean, we know that do you still want emails, yes or no campaigns that are typically sent after a long dormancy aren't terribly effective. And you know, unsubscribe is kind of a KPI on those, right? As much as getting somebody to say they still want it. So I do think with this number being as large as we think it's going to be, that, you know, and some of this is like things we've always recommended, but they're just getting a real spotlight on them, which is just because someone is taking a break from your emails doesn't mean they're not active in applications, in SMS, on the web, you know, logged in. So I think informing a true activity of the subscriber across channel will be key to that. And then, yeah, I think some of the folks that are going to struggle with this change the most are ones that kind of rely on email as a content mechanism because they have trouble updating their website, or so they put all the information in the email and then they click into the same landing page over and over again that says get a quote or you know, give it a try. I think those are going to be a struggle because you're not going to get that kind of feedback on the message, the eyeballs that got on it to sort of hone what the audience is generally interested in. It's going to be interesting times. And I don't know, Zach, on the back channels in the deliverability community, you know, what's some of the general thinking of how, you know, the vendors are going to react to it?
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of consensus other tn just sort of wait and see and say I told you so a lot about how opens are a fuzzy metric, a vanity metric.
Well, we had to get the vanity metric in here.
Yeah, bingo, boom. I want to shift a little bit. By the way, Corey in the chat has been giving us some really great questions. I want to make sure we get to those. So thank you, Corey. Have a couple more I want to get through before we get to those, though. Testing, segmentation. Let's talk about it. It was already problematic hitting statistical significance, even just saying it is problematic with open rates for smaller senders, right? B2B, many B2B companies suffer from this problem where it is a small sample size. If you're splitting a test 50-50, it takes weeks to get significance. So you had to get comfortable with directional results. How is testing impacted by this privacy update? I'm going to start with Mr. Williams.
Well, so first off, I think when we think about segmentation, some of it goes into just definitions and classifications, right? So if your definition of engaged or active is have, you know, and we have these same metrics here at Trendline, you know, have opened and or clicked within a certain time period, right? If that open rate data, you know, you can't use that for an entire batch of the audience because we won't know if they truly opened it. So you start to have to change the definitions. And then how realistic is it going to be in a day-to-day function to say something like clicked and or opened on a non-Apple client? Getting into just how to manage that type of thing is going to be really tricky. We really haven't heard much from the ESPs on what their plan of action is here. So how you deal with that data with the tools that you have will be interesting. So if you think about it from an automation standpoint, right? How many business rules have, if opened and or clicked, move them on to the next step, right? You're just basically opening the castle doors, Game of Thrones, walkers coming into the castle, right? You're going to let everybody go to that next step on that has an apple open. You can't do it. So you have to start looking at all the business rules there you have around segmentations and automations, and then other strategies on segmentation, like, you know, resending a campaign to people who didn't open. So like on an automation thing where you're letting everybody through, on a resend thing, you're minimizing the audience drastically. So I think there's going to be a lot of thinking that needs to happen around how you deal with segmentation around activity and engagement. And then from a testing perspective, personally, you know, and I think we have these debates sometimes in front of our clients. I want to have a conversion be the winner on tests, because at the end of the day, it's about actions and revenue. And I could care less if one email had a higher open rate if the other one had more conversions, right? Because that's ultimately what you're trying to get to. So
if you are writing your hypotheses correctly, you shouldn't be arguing about that anyway once the data comes in. So I'll just throw that out there right here. Write hypothesis, standardize your hypothesis writing. Back to you, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah, so a very common tactic is to, you know, grab a percentage of the audience, try some subject lines out, declare the winner on unique opens, send the rest.
Yep.
You know, that's going to need to move to clicks unless the vendors can separate this data out. The nice thing about open rate as a test variable winner is that it just happens pretty quickly, right? You get the data back. Clicks take a little bit longer to happen. So generally, the rules are going to need to switch to clicks. And ultimately, I think conversions would be the way to go. Now, every email doesn't have a conversion, but clicks are the true proxy for interest and intent to me. So that's how I think you're going to have to change your testing. And I think you're going to have to do a lot more of it too.
Tracking, is that going to factor in more, obviously, as part of as something else we can reach for and as an inbox metric in the future?
Did you like this email? Thumbs up, thumbs down kind of stuff?
Or like a Likert scale, like how, yeah, that kind of. What do you think about that as a tactic?
I mean, it's always been a great thing to do. It doesn't happen as frequently as clicks, but usually you get really good data back from the folks that do it. I think all of those pieces are on the table. You know, profiling, always having modules in there that, you know, keep are we sending what's interesting to you? Do you want to update preferences? You know, the zero party aspect of letting people control things. I think making that stuff a lot easier and not being a hassle will be a good strategy.
How long of a historical data view should users back up from their ESPs if they do not already have it stored internally so that they can do year-over-year comparisons? I'll take a quick stab at this one. Year-over-year was already a little finicky with everyone's been paying attention the last 18 months. Year-over-year is a little strange going into this data privacy update. It's going to be even more for the next 2 years, right? So I think you're looking at creating a lot of new you should back up as much as possible to answer that question. Usually, yes, most ESPs have a range of 6 months or so. You should be storing that on a ongoing basis somewhere. If you haven't, export it now. There are talks about, you know, retrofitting an open rate based on click rate or other things that remain the same. Alex, what are your thoughts on Band-Aid solutions like reporting on an inferred open based on a click rate or based on a site activity rate? Is that something that you think could that people should do, and if so, why? If not, why not?
You know, to broaden the topic out a little bit more, or the question. I'm in the camp that putting a lot of energy. So I think this is going to be a lot larger than folks think it is. And I think, you unless there's a vendor-oriented solution that does this pretty easily, I just think it's going to be a lot of wasted energy to try to reverse engineer this open rate. Because at the end of the day, what does it matter anyway? If you don't know what it is and you're guessing what it is, what's the value in that energy, right? Because it's an estimate. How does it impact the organization? Now, I think to go to another question on there, as far as I think the question was around opens and business models that price off of engagement. This is about as big a disruption for that as possible, right? So, I don't have any insider information here, but I would guess you start those services that are charging by the open, just go to a general CPM. You can probably get to the same revenue, just lower cost of it. I think it changes the value proposition of it a little bit, but yeah, folks that are selling their audience for advertising, this is a huge disruption. But personally, I don't think there's a lot to gain by estimating and trying to reverse engineer this. I also think the winds are blowing in this industry, and I don't expect the other vendors to just let Apple be the private company. Google already has the infrastructure to flip a switch on this. They've been pre-caching for a long time. They just haven't gone the full way that Apple has. So if you spend a lot of energy and resources into, trying to reverse engineer this, and then another vendor falls and we're over half of, 60, 70% of the audience potentially, I think there's more energy in looking downstream, really going past the click, looking at your engagement from what people are doing after they click, than spending a lot of energy seeing if eyeballs are on it, because that rate never meant they read it, right? It just meant it was opened.
Yep. A great question from Jody. I'm going to throw it to Mr. Aab. Will hide my email affect double opt-ins?
So the short answer is it shouldn't, because what's going to happen is Apple is going to create this temporary email, or impermanent email, because it's not necessarily temporary if the user never deletes it. Apple is going to create this impermanent email, and then it's going to route any emails to it back to the user. So the user will still get the confirmation email. So short answer, it shouldn't affect it. Long answer, it may affect it, simply because you may have users who opt in and then delete the email immediately, at which point it suddenly shows up as a bad address. So I think it's going to depend on exactly how you are presenting the double opt-in. If it's simply just a double opt-in and there's no value, there's no reason for the user to wait for the second one, then I think that's going to drop off pretty significantly.
Yeah, and you might start to see the double opt-in come back because of this, right? Just to ensure you're getting a click right at the beginning of the relationship. And how it's so important now, it kills me when welcome emails don't have, stairway to heaven in the hero. I always kind of talk about that with welcome programs. The first email, my joke on that is Journey doesn't come out to 20,000 people and start with a new song. Here's a cut off the new album. They're going to play any way you want it, or don't. You gotta get click through right away. You got to put your best things there, and I think that's going to be just so crucial for people. And so double opt-in, your onboarding program, it's just going to be so crucial to get engagement right off the bat at a click level. And generally that's a good practice anyway. So
great answer, Neil. I hope that answered your question from Alex's last question about how others like Google will get on board with WhatsApp. Apple is probably not going to be the only privacy game in town. Other people will try to make sure that their users feel as safe as Apple's do from a privacy and data approach. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Lauren,
I thought about the Google thing a little bit though. which is Google has been slower to email marketing trends. I was just thinking about this week with, you know, they took forever to, yeah, but I mean, like, think about like responsive design, you know, they were really late on that. They also spend a ton of energy, you know, building their own things. So, you know, this could be the start of potentially a year cycle for them of, you know, how to address it, or do they come up with a different thing? I thought they would jump on it pretty quickly, but I'm starting to change my thinking just looking historically at how slow they've been to like adapt to email things. So I don't know. Time will tell for sure.
Time and truth tells all. It's Justin Bobby. All right. We know that open rates aren't currently 100% accurate, especially with these changes. This one's from Lauren, but I believe many ISPs utilize open rate data to validate emails. Is there any insight into how ISPs are adjusting their rules, and will this affect deliverability? Mr. Aab, over to you, sir.
Anything particular about ISPs adjusting their rules here? One thing to keep in mind is that the ISP knows everything. They don't need the HTML to load to know that the user opened it. They have their own website, their own application. They have their own IMAP signals being sent back from Apple's mail app. So the ISP never really was relying on this particular data, even though they are relying on this kind of data. So I don't expect that ISPs will change very much unless they really have to, simply because they can get the data from other places. They don't have to track the tracking pixel.
And Jamie, as a kind of a follow-up question there, will there be any impact to reporting on bounce backs? I know the code we were getting back was 550, which is probably already classified as a hard bounce to most ESPs. How is that going to impact the bounce reporting on the ASP?
Yeah, so that's a good question too. The thing to remember about bounces is that the only people who see the bounce are you and the ISP who sent it. You, including your ESP, of course. So if your Apple bounces suddenly start to climb out of the recommended zone of 3% or less, Gmail doesn't know that. Only Apple knows that. And Apple knows why it happened, which is because of their own service. So I don't think that bounces should change very much due to either it shouldn't change at all due to the open tracking. And I don't think it'll change very much due to the temporary email address scheme, simply because it's only going to be happening with Apple and nobody else is going to be seeing it.
Sure. One more from Corey. Since this is launching soon and will be live prior to the 2021 holiday season, what impact will this have on email planning this holiday season? This gets to segmentation, this gets into how you curate those lists, but I think if you've been around from a 2020 holiday season perspective, you're going to have a lot of it gets back to that conversion data, making sure that you are making friends with your BI teams, your dev team, whoever owns that data on a first party that you've historically had to go to for new projects maybe and been set with my email only data. You're probably going to have to go to them and make sure that you have up-to-date conversion data on a user level, easily accessible and referenceable in campaigns. Anything to add to that, Mr. Williams?
It's interesting. I haven't had that one yet, but my initial thoughts on holiday is I think it's probably the least affected type of thing because holiday is very editorial in a scripting kind of fashion. Everybody's sending more. It's really hard to navigate, within 2 days of the next email on, what's happening and what's there. So, I mean, I don't think the holiday strategies, nobody does a post-mortem on their holiday thing. And it's like, revenue's down, but we had a lot of good open rates, because holidays are very revenue focused, right? So, I don't see it being as affected as much. I think it's a good it's going to be just a good data collection and really to see what this is happening, because everybody's sending so much more email during the holiday period.
Well, and the talk at every conference you've gone to has been around automations, right? And opens just being such a large part of that calculus is just that's where you need to be spending. I don't know how many holiday campaigns are going to be automated, so it's going to be, that process is going to be fairly similar year over year in terms of how you get your content, how you get data. But yeah, automations not necessarily post purchase automations. It's going to be automations around, last activity or last. Well, really just last activity. I have one more from Lauren here for Mr. Aab. Is there a new suggested approach for IP warm-up plans with these changes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So IP warm-ups, for those that don't know, are essentially creating an expectation with the receiving provider of what you're going to be sending, who you're going to be sending it to, how often, how much. And volume is a really big part of that. So the core concept of create an expectation by starting low and working your way up to whatever your standard send is going to be, that hasn't changed at all. What's going to be more difficult is choosing the audience to send to first. So instead of starting with your 30, 60, 90-day openers, you'll definitely want to be starting with your clickers. And after that, you just kind of have to open up your audience a little bit. But it'll make that part of it a little more fraught. But the providers are not necessarily going to damn you to the 13th circle just because you had kind of a crappy day when day 3, your 200 users, you only had 5 or 6 opens. They know that you have an economy of scale problem with that. They just want to see you. They just want to see you warming up and behaving like a responsible sender and creating that expectation. So I think that it will change a little bit the internal calculus on which users to send to first, but it shouldn't change the warming itself. The concept is still the same.
Questions, unless someone else has something else in the chat, feel free to throw it in there, but I have 2 more. One, Mr. Williams, how does this impact lead scoring for B2B senders?
B2B is going to be heavily impacted by this, right? We know there's a lot of iPhone audience there. It's still kind of early here, and I think generally how are the vendors going to react to this? If we are left to our own devices of combing through this data and trying to append profiles with always Apple opener, seldom Apple opener, I think you're just going to have so many multiple opens per user. I just think it's going to get really messy. So I'm taking a wait and see approach to see what the vendor solutions are, because if they don't provide a way to navigate this and you're left to your own devices on it, it's going to be a lot of energy.
It's a good pun.
And I know from the 30 B2B sales emails I get every morning when I wake up, they don't tend to respect the fact that I'm never looking at them or opening them and keep sending them to me.
That's so weird.
I think I'm looking to see how the vendors react, provide solutions on navigating this, and if they don't, I think you gotta get rid of that. Got to get rid of that open in your scores.
And one more to just kind of summarize. Corey, thank you for asking all the questions. I think this is a good summary to end here for both Mr. Aab and Mr. Williams. What changes?
Scott, before that last one, there was a really good question from Katie there that we were just talking about recently, which was, we've been testing using our CDP data, site visit in the last X days, to see if we can get better handle on engagement in place of the open. Be interesting hearing about how many days, months you guys think it would make the most sense. So we were just talking.
And that's Katie Olson too. I missed her question. I'm so sorry, Katie. Yeah, great question. Sorry about that.
Because we have we have this very irregular year previously. Then we have this change, like, past COVID, as COVID starts to minimize, like the historical data. We've spent a lot of time talking about that. What do you think, Scott?
6 months is what Spamhaus has done, or at least what I've historically used as a rule of thumb in terms of the starting point. It's probably going to be, that's the last or the largest time frame we'd recommend moving forward. I mean, it's probably going to be counting down the days in terms of that last activity of any first property that you, or first party data source that you can get. But I don't think it necessarily needs to be rethought. It's just you're going to need to reset expectations on quantity. I think this is going to be a numbers game is just going to kind of drop, largely based on the fact that the just raw opens were a big part of a lot of that activity that we were able to pick up on for years. So right. Yeah, I do think that's going to have a different, but I don't think that changes the overall framework of what you're going into and looking for. It's just changing the sum that you get at the end of the exercise. Mr. Aab, do you have a different thought on that?
Has been what deliverability has been preaching for years, and this just kind of is that same idea.
Yeah, because I mean, year over year reporting, we've already seen that be crazy with COVID. So it's a tough number. I'd be interested. 18 months is a long time in internet years, and a lot has changed in the world. But yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think CDPs, this is good. If you don't have one, and you're not using that to orchestrate, and look at activity across channels and all the great things that they do, it's a good time to start looking into it, because you're gonna need more levers to manage with your audience.
Last question. Let's try to keep it on 30 seconds for each of you. What changes for 2022 roadmap should users make that were not part of the 2021 roadmaps?
2022. Well, I think generally, and I think even to Katie's type of thing, I think you should, before you do any planning, I think you got to get a snapshot of where you're at right now. That comes from deliverability, that comes from audience. If you do have the ability to do that device testing while you still can and try to predict the impact of this as much as you can, I think that would be a good thing to do. And then I think, as you start planning towards 2022, you really have to look at, not just because I'm a creative background, but I think you just got to really take a hard look at your program. And are we giving people reasons to click? Are we keeping them engaged? Are we sending the same stuff over and over again? I think it's time to buckle down and try a lot more new ideas. Really make sure your call to actions are strong, emails are compelling. I mean, this is the same always, but I think taking a really hard look at your data right now, and making sure that, I always like to say, if I'm on the client side, my biggest fear is that people think they know what's in my email before they open it. That's kind of the downward trend of, so make sure you're keeping people on their toes and trying things, and really build some click testing, conversion testing into your strategy. Sorry, that wasn't 30 seconds.
What's in it for me? Yep. Mr. Aab, anything else?
Yeah, just say add data science. You really need to understand that journey between the initial expectations and conversion. So if you're not doing data science, you need to add it. If you are doing it, do it more. And this kind of loops all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about keeping data for year over year. But I do want to point out that you have a certain ethical obligation not to keep data that you don't need. It's an obligation to your users. So make sure that you're planning exactly what you want to find out. so that you can keep exactly what you need.
Yep. Well, with that, we will wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining. There's a recording of this webinar that will be shared afterwards, and we'll see you again for part 2 in a couple weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.